In the previous chapter, we looked at the subjunctive and now onto the infinitive, and then in chapter 33, the imperative. These three moods are outside the indicative. And if you remember, the indicative is the indication of reality from the speaker or writer's perspective. The subjunctive is that mood of hypothesis or theory, something of suspension. The infinitive is a verbal noun, different than a verbal adjective in the participle, a verbal noun here in the infinitive. Let's pray and ask the Lord to give us wisdom as we work through chapter 32. Lord, help students as they think about the nuances of the infinitive, how the infinitive can act substantively, how it acts adverbially, and oftentimes completes a verbal idea. Help them to memorize now another paradigm and to continue to remember what they've studied with subjunctives and participles. They've covered so much recently, and I pray that you will give them wisdom. Help them with vocab, and let all of this come to fruition as they read your word. I ask in Christ's name, amen. Let's think then about the infinitive, a verbal noun. Now, we thought about participles in the previous section of mounts, and participles are verbal adjectives, right? They modified a noun. Here we have verbal nouns themselves, and verbal nouns are translated with a keyword to. We remember that finite verbals are limited, that is, they're finite. That's what limited means, finite. They're limited by person and number. Do you remember our endings way back in verbs? That's right. It's the ending of a word. So if we have a word here with several letters, it's the ending that we would have the person and number of that particular verb. But with the infinitive, we are not limited by person and number. And yet there is often the designation of a subject with the accusative. As Mounts notes on page 370, it's the accusative of reference, and it often acts as the subject of the infinitive. So our key word is to. We are not limited by person or a number. It's that to infinity and beyond. To blank something. We're not talking about a specific person doing that, a singular or plural, like first, second, third person, or a singular plural. We are talking just about the act itself, to do something. With the infinitive, we still think about aspect, and we have our keywords of present with continually, and the aorist, just this perfective idea, the perfect tense, to have studied, that combinative. Now, we want to try to follow these cues with translation and bring the idea across, but it is, as Mounts notes, sometimes very difficult to include some of these key words like continually or to have, and we may just have to at times flatten it out and just say to study, and that may actually work best for the aorist and sometimes even the perfect. Let context determine how you bring the infinitive across. The morpheme. This is perhaps the most important slide of the screencast here. Another paradigm. You just have to memorize what you see. There's really just no other way around it. We begin with the present, and we have active, middle, and passive, and those cells continue all the way across with the first, second aorist, and then also the perfect. Look, though, at some of our cues. With the first aorist, see saw, they. We're used to those ideas. Ani here, no longer just an epsilon, but that lengthened a, as we saw in the passive with the participle. The perfect active indicative tense formative is ka. Here, flattened to ke. And we're used to the perfect as well, not having a connecting vowel in the middle in the passive, and we have an absence here. So there are some cues that resemble the actual factors of these tense forms that we've seen already. So just to memorize, ain, esthai. Notice middle and passive are exactly the same in the present, and that we have seen in the past, so that's nothing new. Sai, sosthai, thanai. Again, you hear that saw, we're used to that with the aorist they, saw here. Ain, esthai, ainai, rather, and then kenai, sthai. It will help you, excuse me, to just go over this time after time, and you will memorize it. Get it down. This is another paradigm, but you're going to have to memorize this. Ain, esthai, sai, sosthai, thanai, ain, esthai, ainai, kenai, sthai. Just get the paradigm and have it down, just going over it and over. I suggest just going down each column, one after another, and then get to where you can just loop them through. Ain, esthai, sai, sosthai, thanai, ain, esthai, ainai, kenai, sthai. I closed my eyes when I did that, just did it from memory, going over and over it. You'll just need to get it down. So what does this look like? Lu ain, see the ain, lu esthai, lusai, lusosthai, luthanai, labain. Remember that second aorist, different stem because it's grabbing right from the root with lambano, labesthai, graphenai, just a different word here to show the nuance, lelukenai, lelusthai. I want to note for you a few nuances of infinitives. I'm going to present 3 slides here, so we have A, we'll come to B and C in just a moment. A good bit of this material is in the footnotes of Mounce, but also his book, Morphology of Biblical Greek. You may have seen the abbreviation MBG throughout, and that's what some of this material comes from. I want to present this to you because there are some places where infinitives can be hard to recognize. You're not sure what's going on. So let me walk through a few ideas with you again. Pause the screencast, and you may want to look back at the pages that I referenced, page 460 for instance. Well, let's come back to these liquid verbs. Remember what a liquid verb is? That's right. The stem ends in lambda, mu, nu, or rho. When the stem ends in one of those letters, remember if it bumps up against a sigma, we've got some problems. In the indicative, there was the inclusion of an epsilon sigma so that we would have a contract and that sigma would drop out. Here, the sigma drops out, but we don't have a contract because there is not the inclusion of this epsilon. It's just a sigma. And so what happens is there's a dropping of the sigma, but there's no lengthening of the alpha that follows. And you can see here in these examples, what we have is nigh and rai as endings when we would expect with the first aorist psi. But what we have is just the actual liquid stem that sigma drops out, and you can see here, agerai, arai, apoktenai, krinai, manai. Because the sigma just drops out, there is, again, no epsilon. In the past, we saw where that epsilon and then the sigma alpha iota, that sigma would drop, alpha would cause this epsilon to become eta, and then the iota would subscript. That is in the indicative. That does not happen here in the infinitive because there is no epsilon. So that sigma is just going to drop right out, and we have this ending here, alpha iota, with each of the active liquid stems here, cani, and with ni and ri. But as I note here below, not all liquid aorists are first aorists. There's some that are second. And how do we distinguish the second? We just have that different stem often, changing of the stem with that, the second aorist just grabbing perhaps a different root or no extension. And here with the present, the doubling of the lambda, but with the second aorist, the single lambda, but you can notice the ending is the same for both of these in the present, just ain. And that is a blessing for us that not all liquids are first aorist, some are second, and if they're second, well, easy enough because the second aorist ending is not psi, it's ain. The second nuance of infinitives that I want to note with you are me verbs. And me verbs, we will come to these in a couple of chapters, chapter 34 and 36, where we'll cover these further. And they'll have the same ni ending as liquids, but for different reasons. Me verbs do not take a connecting vowel and thus use ni as the actual tense formative. So ani is the present active infinitive from a me. We don't have that ain ending that we are used to with the present active indicative for me verbs. It's just the ni ending. Again, some of what you're learning in Greek, you have to memorize it. But you need to memorize it because ani occurs many times in Greek. This is a nuance of me verbs where they just have the ni ending. Didomi, again, like a me, didoni is going to be the infinitive. So the ni there, what we need to remember is not being confused between the present and the aorist, because if we see this alpha iota ending, we're often going to think aorist. But if it is a me verb, that is the way the present active expresses the infinitive as well. So we come to the third slide here, contract verbs again. I'm noting page 444 to 445. The appendix in Mounts here, and the appendices that Mounts provides are so good. If you haven't had a chance to just thumb through those, try to do that. I want to think about contract verbs again because they can be problematic. You're memorizing this paradigm in the present and you're looking for ain in the present active. And when you come across on, you are confused. Well, I want to try to help you with that. The reason we have agapon here is because of the contract, the alpha contract. So I've written this out, and again, you want to pause the screencast and just look this through. Here's our contract vowel, and then ain. So this epsilon, again, is weak. It's going to drop out. Look back at chapter 17 for the rules. And the iota is represented not by a superscript or a subscripting, but a circumflex. Again, we're used to that iota sometimes going underneath. That doesn't happen here. It goes on top. And you see the circumflex right there. So we have agapon. When we have the epsilon contract, again, it's this contraction pattern. We have this double E, which goes to epsilon iota, and we have the circumflex over the top to let us know that a contraction is taking place. Omicron contract, we have this Omicron epsilon, which goes to Omicron upsilon, oo. The iota drops and is represented by a circumflex again, and you see it right there. Look back at chapter 17 for these patterns. Let me note, just as we conclude this slide, that with the aorist, the contract vowel lengthens before the actual ending for the infinitive is placed on the word. So we have a psi. We have a psi here for the epsilon and the alpha contracts. That letter is lengthened to the eta. With the omicron, it's lengthened to omega. Again, our psi ending is for that first aorist active, and we will have, with the vowel preceding it, with the contract vowel, what's going to happen is we will not have a psi, because the sigma forces the alpha to lengthen to omega. We will not have e psi, because the sigma forces the epsilon to lengthen to eta. We will not have omicron psi, because the sigma again forces the omicron to lengthen to omega. Translating the infinitive. There are three different uses of the infinitive. The one is substantival. This is not as common as some others, but we want to just set this out for you here. The substantival infinitive functions as a noun. It just takes the place of a noun. So if it takes the place of a noun, it can be the subject or the direct object of a verb. And those verbs are often estin and de. Here in Philippians 1:21, emoi gar ta zein Christos, kai ta apathanein kerdos. Familiar passage. To live is Christ, to die is gain. Well, we have an implied estin here. And what is the subject of estin? Ta zein. To live is Christos. Christos is our predicate nominative. And to die, in the next clause, ta apathanein, that's the subject. To die is kerdos. And kerdos then would be our predicate nominative. So ta and ta here, these are both subjects, and as such they are both nominative. And here's our verb. When we have estin or de with an infinitive, and we can't find a third singular noun that fits as the subject of estin, who is or what is necessary. If we can't find an explicit, look, there may be an infinitive that's actually functioning substantively as the subject of that particular verb. The complementary infinitive is perhaps the most common. It's the use of the infinitive to complete a verb, and we have a list of verbs here that are frequently needing to be completed. I am about to, well, about to what? I'm about to do something. I am able, dunamai, I am able, and here I've included to as the actual infinitive keyword for translation. But these verbs themselves don't need that. So for instance, thello, I desire, well, that's a verb that needs to be completed somehow. It needs a complement. I desire what? I desire to, and that's where the infinitive comes in. I am beginning, I'm beginning to what? It is lawful to what? And so forth. So the complementary value of an infinitive is according to specific verbs that are of necessity or ability or volition. I am able, I would wish to, I would want to. And then the infinitive completes or complements that verb. Finally, the way that infinitives function, again, structurally with certain prepositions. And when we have a preposition with an infinitive, there's always a definite article. And there are some key patterns. Dieta with the infinitive is a causal idea. Aista is a purpose idea. Prosta, likewise, a purpose idea. Sometimes a spatial idea with the prosta. Temporal, pro-to means before. Ento, while. Metata, after. Hoste, result. And you can see mounts for details here, but the patterns established by the preposition and the articular infinitive are very stable. And so when you see prosta with the infinitive, you're thinking some kind of purpose or direction. Aista, same. Dieta, you think of that preposition plus the infinitive as an explanation of the cause of that action. And in the whole sequence of the verse or the clause, you'll want to think about causal with dieta, aista, purpose, prosta, likewise purpose, and then some temporal nuances, pro-to, ento, metata, and then host it with result. Vocab, just review, review, review. There's no substitute for learning vocab. Just a couple there in chapter 32. Dikaios for right, and then mellow, and continue to look at those there on page 377, and enjoy working through infinitives and the nuances of them in your work this week.